We're going full throttle right from the beginning. Our topic is the Great Migration, a discussion on digital and physical migration. And who better to kick off moderation duties than a foreigner? Ladies and gentlemen, let's warmly welcome the distinguished Stephen Knight, blogger and host of the award-winning Godless Spellchecker podcast. Stephen is highly polished. You'll see when he comes out, and injects a witty, biting humor into his moderation style. Plus, he is the most proper of Englishmen. So let's please welcome to the stage the poor man's Benedict Cumberbatch. Welcome, Stephen. Got it. And first up on stage is going to be the extravagant Lauren Chen, sometimes better known as Roaming Millennial. As a socio-political commentator and host of both the CR TV show Roaming Millennial Uncensored and the new Blaze TV show Pseudo Intellectual, Lauren's star is rising rapidly. The past 3 years, she's been a YouTube sensation with over 20 million views, and staying busy with appearances on Fox News, Daily Wire, Rebel Media, PragerU, and The Rubin Report. Lauren is most that was probably Steve. Most passionate about individual liberty, gender equality, and issues surrounding race. So let's give it up for Lauren. Next up is another foreigner from far-off New Zealand. Michael Rowlands, a.k.a. Music Man Mike, is a mean guitar player, music aficionado, and songwriter. At last year's MythCon, he had us introduce him as a radically left, culturally Marxist, SJW YouTube personality. And this year, he softened that label, and he is a progressive with opinions on socio-cultural politics. Welcome, Mike. So we seem to be on a roll with folks from Oceania. So let's next welcome to the stage a YouTuber and cultural political commentator based in Brisbane, Australia. Daisy Cousens is a regular television commentator on Sky News and contributor to publications like The Spectator Australia and The Courier Mail. She definitely considers herself to be on the front lines of the culture war. So let's welcome to the stage Daisy Cousens.
Stephen.
And rounding out our panel is a New York City-based comedian, writer, progressive commentator, podcaster, and founder of the unapologetically liberal website RepublicanDirtyTricks.com, now known as RDT Daily. Tara Devlin is no stranger to speaking her mind, having opened for Judy Gold, Kate Clinton, and Jessica Kirson while appearing on numerous nationally syndicated liberal talk shows. Let's give it up for Tara.
I think my mic's working. Yep.
Yeah? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone.
I'm okay too, thank you. It's a huge pleasure to get the first panel underway. It's really fantastic to see so many faces here, because I'm sure you're all aware that there was a group of people who were really committed to the idea of preventing this event from happening. So you're all testament to the fact that there were a bunch of utter failures, essentially. So thank you for being here. It's a great panel for the first one. We're going to be talking about the Great Migration, a discussion on digital and physical immigration. And Daisy, I think I'll start with you. In a culture we have now on social media, and where people are being deplatformed, sometimes it almost seems like it's due to political bias. Do we need a sort of digital bill of rights to protect us from these big companies who are deciding who can be online and who can't?
Yeah, I think we definitely do, but it's not just about the sort of deplatforming and potential political bias going on in companies like Facebook and Google. It's about privacy. I don't think your average person realizes just how efficiently big corporations are tracking our every move, from where we live, where we work, who we're talking to, all private information. All of that gets tracked, and really what it's the equivalent to is walking around with like a squadron of like spy drones following you everywhere. And when you think of it like that, it should scare us. Like it's quite scary, but I think the reason it doesn't is because, one, it's invisible, and two, it's associated with products that we like Facebook and like online shopping. So it's this sort of positive stimulation coupled with effectively we're being spied on. So again, the devil would be in the detail, because if you regulate it too much, then we just won't have a functioning internet and companies won't be able to do anything. But a few basic tenets, like the ability to opt out of being tracked. Companies need to be more transparent with that kind of thing. Obviously, more transparency with social media deplatforming, what they actually might mean by their very vague terms and conditions. Maybe companies need permission if a third party wants to transfer your data, all of that kind of stuff. But I think in this brave new digital age, with the internet, which is evolving and evolving and evolving faster than we can imagine, we do need a different set of rules.
Lauren, you're somebody who doesn't shy away from tackling sort of politically diverse topics on your channel. And what's your viewpoint on the idea of some legislation that would give you as a content creator more protection from the companies that own YouTube and Twitter and various other platforms?
Well, as someone who's, hopefully mic is on, yes it is. I'm generally not a big proponent of, yes, let's have more government, more rules and all of this, but I find when we look at the online sphere, we see an area where consumer protections have really lagged behind every single other industry, right? It's not okay for restaurants to just serve you rotten food, but for some reason, that reason being, I think, a lot of lobbying, these tech companies have gotten away with pretty much anything under the sun. And it's only now that we're starting to be concerned about it when we're finding out about things like, the Hey Alexa or Siri or whatever, those comments that you make to your devices, it actually turns out that's being sent to real people. Now, finally, people are more aware of what's been going on, I think, for a long time. So, an Internet Bill of Rights, that sounds very... it sounds like it's this new thing, this thing we've never encountered before, a whole different maybe constitution. But really, I think what a lot of people want is just the same consumer protections they've had in every other industry applied to the tech industry and online sphere.
Michael, you're somebody with a hat. What's all that about?
Well, some of the more astute amongst you might have noticed it's not actually a MAGA hat. You'll find that it actually says, "Make skeptics great again." Thanks, Mum. Because I believe, as a skeptic myself, that the name skeptic has been tarnished by dickheads like Sargon. Don't worry, we had beers last night, we talked about it. Just a bit of tongue-in-cheek, eh?
Okay,
yeah. And... Well, I would like to say that I agree with Daisy and Lauren, capitalism sucks ass. Yeah! And thanks, other mum.
So, Tara, you're applauding that now. So how do you feel about these big conglomerates that control the political discourse?
I'm not happy about it. I feel that it's a necessary evil, though. That's how I feel about Facebook, because we stream on Facebook, we stream on YouTube. There's so many rules. I have been put in the doghouse before where they block you. And there's nothing, for a certain period of time. They put you on a hold where you can't do anything. And you don't know why sometimes. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't speak to a real person. You're just stuck. And that's the whole thing with corporations owning our discourse. At least if there is some kind of regulation on social media, on these big companies, we, the people, can go and we would have a say. We would have a say if we went to our representative and we could lobby them. Do you know what I mean? There's no way you can go into the Facebook offices and express your disapproval of their censorship policies that constantly change as well. And it's arbitrary.
To the headquarters doesn't work either.
Say that again? What?
I said handcuffing yourself to the headquarters doesn't work
No,
either.
exactly. So that's why we form government anyway. So we get together as a community and we tell the corporations that this is how we want you to behave and treat us. And especially if it's a platform that is essential for democracy. This is the new, all these platforms, this is the new reality we live in.
Okay, that's a great bit. So Daisy, I'd like you to follow up on that. So Tara just mentioned the idea that these platforms are essential. And it seems to me that you can fast become a non-person in the public sphere if you're prevented from using these tools. If you want to be an activist or a content creator, if Twitter decides to ban you, you're persona non grata, you disappear out of people's consciousness. So how much of an effect is that having on political discourse, do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, platform access, if you're any kind of commentator, is so completely essential to the profession. And certainly we see people like Laura Loomer, whether you agree with her or disagree with her, she's a voice, and she's disappeared, like, off the face of the planet now. You can't find her anywhere except on sites like Telegram, and there just aren't enough people on sites like Telegram or Gab to actually create the sort of commentary circle that you want. So it really, really does have an effect, and it is a shame because it's bad for democracy. Aside from anything else, if you're banning certain voices, even if those voices are saying things you don't particularly like, or you're preventing people from seeking the information and potentially disagreeing with those voices and thinking, hey, I actually don't like that, you've possibly changed my opinion unintentionally. So that's another reason to have a digital Bill of Rights, because not only can you lose your platform, you'll also lose your livelihood. I mean, people rely on the internet, not just commentators, but everyone, to advertise businesses, for instance, or to advertise products or to sell things. And if Facebook decides in all its omnipotent glory, no, you can't be on a platform anymore, well, there goes your income. And, I mean, I love your comment about capitalism, myself and Laura, but I may be a capitalist, but I'm not a corporatist. I believe in freedom. I believe in freedom first and foremost, and I can acknowledge, again, I believe in the free market and free enterprise, but big corporations have more power over people's lives and freedoms than most governments nowadays, particularly big tech.
Mike, did you want to follow up on that?
First I was going to say I don't really think that democracy is losing anything by not hearing from Laura Loomer. So, and second of all, I don't know, the idea of, I agree that these big companies having so much control over stuff is not a good thing. I mean, that's kind of being on the left a little bit, but the idea of like deplatforming from a social media platform. I mean, first of all, it's happened to me as well. We were just saying about, I've been banned off Twitter. I've had videos deleted from YouTube. Not because there was anything wrong with them, but because a lot of people decided that they didn't like me and flagged my videos, and so they get deleted, right? But I don't see that as like censorship or deplatforming or whatever. I mean, sure, you're taken off that platform, but there's always another baker, if I'm honest. You can always go somewhere else and talk, and even if you're taken off all of the platforms, you can still go outside and spread your nonsense on the corner if you want to. No one's stopping you from doing that. Government censorship is a bad thing, and so if the government's coming in and saying, or putting you in jail, I suppose, for saying what you're saying, obviously that's a bad thing. But if you go on Facebook and say, N-word, fucking, stupid brown people, and then
got to do something with my Tuesday nights, Mike.
What's that?
Got to do something with my Tuesday nights.
Yeah, I know. But then if the company has rules, and sure, maybe they're a bit ambiguous or whatever, but they do have rules, and if you break those and you get thrown off, that's kind of the consequences of your action, right?
Lauren, following up on what Mike's just said, then can we just go elsewhere? Is it really that big of a deal if Twitter says no? Are these various other platforms we can be heard on? Are we really overblowing this issue?
Well, that's a big issue with a lot of the arguments that are being made in favor of, like, oh, this is censorship, this isn't, right? Because, it's true, censorship really only applies in the legal sense to the government, but what we see when it comes to social media platforms is it's not always as simple as, oh, just find another baker, right? We see that with, Twitter has a huge monopoly on the social media scene, and even when we see competitors try to come in and get a different segment of the market, we see them being attacked by the media as being, Nazi platforms. And cases like Subscribestar, which tries to present an alternative to something like Patreon, we see that payment processors refuse to work with them, and some are saying there's maybe even collusion between other social media platforms and things like places like PayPal, MasterCard, and things in order to prevent competition from entering into the market. I'm like Daisy. I love free markets. I don't like corporatism. One of the things that I think hasn't gotten enough attention are the fact that these big tech companies are monopolies. There are already laws on the books to prevent monopolies from forming. They're called antitrust laws. And a lot of people will say, well, hang on, it's not a monopoly. Like, Gab exists. You can start Gab. That's not how monopolies are defined in the legal sense. It's not whether or not it's possible to technically have a site where people can post comments and, oh, look, it's a competitor to Facebook. No. It's determined by market share. Right now, places like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram being part of Facebook, and YouTube, they have overwhelming control of the market, especially if we look at Google, just as an advertiser, as a search engine. It is unreal how much power Google has amassed. And Daisy's right, like these corporations have more control of us than, in a lot of ways, our governments. They can control what we say, they can control who we send money to. In Laura Loomer's case, they can even control whether we have a bank account and are able to pay our bills. It's insane, and I think, I consider myself in favor of small government because I want personal liberty, right? So to me, it doesn't matter if it's the government or Google who's infringing on my rights. It's not okay in either case.
How are we going to fix the problem of
break them up?
Corporate? Yeah, but who's going to do that?
Right.
Well, there's a Federal Trade Commission that's specifically, their whole purview is to monitor things like this. So, I mean, when mergers happen, like, for example, Disney recently acquired Fox, a lot of people weren't sure whether that was going to be approved. I'm shocked that nothing has been done yet, but actually I think the latest news is the FTC is going to be investigating places like Google, and I absolutely do believe they should be broken up.
Cool.
Okay.
Wow.
So, Tara, moving on a little bit from digital immigration and the problems we have with these monopolies, physical immigration in general, is always a massively big political issue. It always seems to dominate every election cycle. It's something the public deeply care about. And my question is, what kind of rules can we enforce on people immigrating to other countries that are fair? What kind of things, if any, should we ask of people coming and trying to start a new life in the country that you live in?
What kind of rules can we tell
So,
them?
for instance, should we demand that these people have a respect for freedom of expression, gender equality? Is that a fair assessment to make to somebody who wants to travel to a different country?
I would honestly, I would think that, what you guys were saying about the monopolies, we have these antitrust laws on the books, but if we don't have representatives who are eager and willing to enforce them, then this is what we have. They turn a blind eye to the immense power, the immense corporate power, and they're not going to break it up because the root of the issue is money and politics. That's the root of all evil, and they're not going to, they're really not working for us. They're working for they want to keep their positions, and they're working for the corporations that now run government. Anyway, so as far as putting rules on people who come in, I would assume and hope that people who come to America, if this is what we're talking about specifically, have a respect for democracy and freedom. And what is freedom, though? Everybody, it's such a broad word. I think that somebody who can't go to a doctor when sick, that's not free. You're not free. If you don't have a living wage, if you can't retire, you're not free. And so I believe that this country, we do have the grand experiment in liberal democracy is on the ropes right now because of, it's not because of immigration, it's because of the fact that we have representatives now that are in bed with corporate power.
Okay, Daisy, you're, as a representative of Australia here today, of all Australia, your immigration system is something that's coveted in my home country quite a lot. It's often thrown up as an example of where we'd like to go with immigration. It's held up to this high standard. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what is expected of people coming to settle in Australia, and what, if anything else, you would like to add or subtract to that system already.
Cool. Australia has some of the strictest immigration laws in the world. But having said that, there are a lot of ways to get into Australia legally. There are a lot of different visa types for skilled workers and unskilled workers and students, and we have sort of a point-based and merit-based immigration system as well. We have a legal refugee intake every year. There are a lot of ways to get in, but you have to get in legally. We have a very, very strict policy against, we follow the zero tolerance policy against illegal immigration. And most of our, well, really all of our illegal immigrants try to come by boat. You know, we say we don't need a wall because we have a moat. You know, we're an island. And what happened, we learnt a harsh lesson about our borders in Australia about 10 years ago when the Labor government opened the borders and said, right, all the boats from Indonesia, places like that can come across. What happened was we had to open an extra 19 detention centres on islands out of the coast of Australia. We had 50,000 people cramped into those detention centres. 8,000 of those were children, and 1,200 people drowned at sea trying to get over because they started up the people smuggling trade. So you had people in other countries lying to people and saying, oh, you'll get straight into Australia, it'll be fine, just give us $10,000, you can come on this rickety boat, possibly drown, but you'll get there and it'll be cool. So we learnt from that, and when the next government came in, they instigated what they call Operation Sovereign Borders. So if you try to come to Australia by boat illegally, you will not get in. That's just the message that we put out there. The best you can hope for is a temporary protection visa, which lasts for about up to 3 years, for instance, and that entitles you to Medicare, that entitles you to government benefits, you're very well taken care of, but there's no path to citizenship. And because of our stance on borders and immigration, we have one of, if not the most successful multicultural societies in the world. We have very low crime, we have very few problems with ethnic enclaves, people integrate. Migrants on various visas, including our refugees, get access to 510 hours of English language classes, for instance, to help them to integrate. And it works for us. And yes, I think our detention centre situation can be improved, definitely. There's always room for improvement. But yeah, that's why I guess the UK, and I think, this has been mentioned in the US, that the Australian immigration system is optimal. We do it very well.
Mike, big fan of the Australian immigration system?
Honestly, I don't know why anyone would want to move to Australia. Can't even think of it. Actually, New Zealanders like to move to Australia a lot. I just looked it up. It said that in 2003 you got 650,000 New Zealanders. So there's obviously something wrong with New Zealand.
I like New Zealanders. They can come to Australia.
Yeah, they all tend to fucking...
Not the Indonesians, though. I'm just kidding. High five.
Yeah.
Should we have any expectations on people trying to immigrate to other countries, like skill
I
sets,
think there
etc.?
are. But, if you're I honestly, I don't really know what the only thing I know about New Zealand immigration is that you can come to New Zealand, you can get a 1-year work and holiday visa, you can stay for a year, and then you can kind of apply for citizenship. But I do know that it is pretty damn hard. I had a friend who had a girlfriend from Czech, and she came, and you have to have a full-time job, and have to have certain income and all that sort of stuff, and it makes it really difficult for just your average person to immigrate to the country. And I don't know. I think that's kind of dumb.
Isn't it the issue that some people don't want the average person coming to their country? They'd rather have people that would contribute in a way that would improve the country. Is that a fair
I'm
concern?
of the opinion that most people can contribute pretty nicely. Give people a chance. I like people. People are good, and a lot of people
do that.
What's that?
Nothing. There we go.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Oh, fucking hippies!
Give people a chance. I agree. I totally agree.
Maybe but I like to give people the benefit of the doubt most of the time. That's why I hung out with Sargon last night.
They were getting on like a married couple, I have to say. Just so you know. Lauren, you focus a lot.
I wasn't dumb, but whatever.
It is what it is.
You focus a lot on US politics, and of late we've seen ICE detention centres described by quite senior public officials as concentration camps.
They are.
And that's had an impact on the discourse and various actions, I would say, that have taken place, but terrorist acts. So is that kind of rhetoric, I mean, would you describe that as a fair summation of the situation? And if not, what sort of effect does that kind of rhetoric have on people?
Well, I think, Tim Poole, who's obviously part of planning this event, did a video about it where it's like he actually goes into the definitions and things of concentration camps. And in the technical definition, usually when it comes to something like a detention center for migrants or even, I think, POWs in some certain cases, like concentration camps is not the vernacular that's used. And when we're just talking about casual language, the average person, I think there's a very specific reason why that term is used, and it's to conjure up images of the Holocaust, right? Anyone who says, "Oh, what you think we're trying to compare that to not what?" No, yeah, I think that's why it's done. And I think that is an unfair comparison. But that being said, that doesn't mean we have to be happy about what's happening in the detention centers, right? I actually think the number of people who are being kept there, and I think a lot of them, like Daisy alluded to previously, are being told lies about what's going to happen when you come to the border. So the United States and actually Canada, to a large extent, we're in a tough situation where we have all of these people coming in under the assumption that they'll just be able to get in. And obviously, we have checks. We have to do ideally a background check. You can't just show up and expect to be a resident with all of the privileges that implies. So what do we do with these people? Like, that's actually a very, very hard thing to solve. Like, do we just let them in, but we don't know who they are? Like, do we send them back? What if they don't have anywhere to go back to? That's why these detention centers exist, and it's a very, very terrible situation for everybody involved, for the people who have to be in them, for the Americans and the Canadians and all the taxpayers who are paying to fund this. No one's happy about this, and I think the detention centers are actually a symptom of a larger problem, which is we have to look at, and the Trump administration is doing this. In Canada, there's a federal election that's going to be coming up. We're going to be looking at our increasingly large immigration problem as well to address the issue. I think people, they need to know that you can't just show up into the country and expect to be let in. If you are an asylum seeker, there's an official process that you need to follow. You have to come in through a legal port of entry. And I mean, for anyone else who may just be hoping to come in but doesn't meet asylum, criteria, you can apply from an embassy and be able to live your life in your own country with your family without being in that detention center. So, I mean, I'm with everybody who's complaining about detention centers. They're not a good thing, but at the same time, we can agree it's not a good thing without saying that we're reenacting the Holocaust.
Okay, so just before I throw to Tara, just a quick throwback to Mike about when I mentioned concentration camps, then you affirmed that you think that descriptor's accurate. Now, just in light of what Lawrence just said, do you use that in the semantic? It technically is a concentration camp. Are you alluding to sort of Auschwitz? And
I think of arguing the semantics of a place where we're concentrating people and putting them in detention and then not supplying them basic human rights like toilet paper and beds and heat is. If we're going to argue semantics about that, I don't care. And obviously, I mean, Lauren said that she's not cool with it either. That's fine with me. I think the thing that needs to be done is to look at the reasons why people are coming to America. I mean, you can say, okay, we need to look at our immigration policy or whatever. But I mean, what about like American foreign policy in South America? Climate change is a big thing, which is going to be increasingly getting worse and driving people out of places. And there's a lot of things that can be done. But currently, the Trump administration doesn't give a fuck about climate change. They, aren't acknowledging anything to do with their terrible foreign policy as well. So, I mean, you want to talk about things that are causing this immigration crisis, the border crisis? We're looking in the wrong place.
Right.
okay, Tara, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to take a 2,000-mile walk across the desert with my child. For the hell of it, because I want to clean somebody's toilet here in the United States or get some great benefit. What kind of we don't even have the greatest social safety net in this country, and there's many restrictions, including for people who aren't citizens to get, and that's Bill Clinton's ending welfare as we know it. He changed that. So it's just a canard that people are coming here to have some kind of cushy whatever. But the fact is there's push factors and pull factors that make people want to take that journey. And many of the people and throughout history, we have the statistics. The United States has accepted in its history more immigrants than any other country on earth. That is our foundation, because we are our original founders were immigrants themselves. They came here and they displaced the indigenous people. So in fact, one of the charges against the king was he was limiting immigration to the United States. So in the Declaration of Independence.
Sorry about that.
But that was
I feel terrible.
I hear you. But even still, we have struggled because we are human beings with the tribal mentality of these people are coming. You can look throughout history in general, no matter what happens, newcomers are going to, you have the same rhetoric about the newcomer, that they're bringing disease, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. Some of them, I suppose, are good people, I guess, right? But
on both sides.
both sides.
Yeah,
Very fine people on both sides.
So, since we're on Trump, Daisy, we're in the great US of A today. I thought I'd ask you about his... Glad you're with us, Mike.
I was pretty drunk last night.
Spooning Sargon, basically.
What did you say?
So...
I am feeling assaulted.
So Daisy, Trump's executive order, which was more popularly known as the Muslim ban, which limited immigration from various majority Muslim countries, brought into the debate this idea of whether or not we could impose a religious test on people travelling to different countries. Do you think that's a fair thing to advocate for? People coming into your country decide what sort of ideologies they have or religions they have?
I think that countries should be allowed to let whoever they want into their country and decide who they don't want to come in. Now, if you were going to ban a particular religion from coming into a country, like, the government would have to have a pretty damn good reason to do it, because if you're randomly doing that on an international scale for just sort of no seeming reason, well, that would look terrible internationally, and there might be repercussions with people not wanting to trade with you, etc. But also, within the country, if you're banning a religion with no great demand from the public, well, they'll just punish you with a ballot box. So it's not something that countries can just kind of do and throw around. That they'd have to have a very, very good reason to do it. And if you're talking about, say, a values test, for instance, coming into a country, Australia actually threw this idea up very recently of on our citizenship test, also including values questions, just to, again, we were noting a slightly rising problem with ethnic enclaves in the western suburbs of Sydney that were largely Muslim, and we pride ourselves on not having that in Australia. So some of the core things they said we could ask was, say, do you believe in freedom of speech, and equality of the sexes, the rule of law, and democracy, and just very, very stock standard values that are typical of a Western liberal democracy. And there was a lot of howling down of that by sort of oppositional people on the far left, because apparently asking people whether they believe in freedom of speech is somehow racist. I don't know. But yeah, I think that I believe in national sovereignty, and I think that a country's first and foremost responsibility, I knew that would happen, has to be to its own citizens. So yeah, give countries power to do that, but they really do have to have a damn good reason to do it.
Okay. So Lauren, national populism is this is a Nazi salute. Somebody get a quick screenshot here. I'm just going to quickly throw to Lauren.
Right.
So this idea of a religious test, is this a fair way to look at immigrants? And national populism seems to be a big thing at the moment. Is it right for a country to say, we're a Christian nation, we will prioritize Christians, and Muslim nations do the same thing but the other way around?
So like Daisy, I totally believe that a country has its first obligation to its own citizens. I believe that any immigration policy should be done with the native population in mind. That doesn't mean it's necessarily anti-immigrant, though, right? Because I do believe that in certain cases there can be benefits from immigration, especially when it's high-skilled. In terms of any sort of values test, I'm against saying, are you a Muslim? Yeah? Okay, then you can't come. Because, obviously, there are a lot of great, very well-educated, wonderful Muslims out there that I think Canada has benefited from having. However, we can't overlook the fact that there are, especially among certain religions, increases of things like, we've had honor killings in Canada. We've had communities who have attempted to go to our Supreme Court and say, we don't want to live under Canadian law, we want to live under our religious law. Those are obviously problems. And I think a values test can, in a very basic way, weed out people who don't want to assimilate to, Australian life, American life, Canadian life, without simply saying, no this or this or this. And, if you are a Christian nation, for example, I think it's very fair to say, for example, like refugees, to prioritize people who are not only being persecuted overseas, but also perhaps maybe have more similar values too. Does that say like, oh, Christian is plus 5 points, Scientologist minus 27?
Sounds fair. Sounds fair.
Maybe for Scientologists, the only one that people would get on board with. But I think there should be at least some sort of discussion about the belief systems that we are importing, because don't forget, all of our countries were democracies. So this isn't just about, I don't want to live next to someone who doesn't believe the same things I do. Eventually these could be significant voting blocks in your own country, and I certainly wouldn't want to, in 15 or 20 years, see an initiative to, for example, disenfranchise women or something like that, make homosexuality illegal because we weren't having this conversation.
Okay, I think I best throw it to Mike before he hurts himself.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So this idea that that Muslims are inherently worse.
No one said that.
No. I'm not saying that you did. I'm just saying there is in the ether. Okay. So I was reading an article about 2016 after the Pulse nightclub shooting, and there is a certain political leaning that has a talking point that Muslim people are their beliefs are like anti-LGBT. That's like
Just the belief.
it is. But the fact is, we have polling data that shows that Muslim people in America are more accepting of gay people than Christian Americans. So
I think that was against evangelicals, so very strict.
I've got the thing right here. Here it is. Muslims 52% agree that being gay is okay, and then you've got where are we? Catholics, Protestant 52%, white evangelicals 34%. So the idea that the Muslim religion is necessarily anti-LGBT, I think is not correct. And the other thing that shows is that over time, the approval of being gay or being LGBT has rises amongst the Muslim community. That being, on the other hand, we're talking about friggin' America for itself. People just look at the Trump administration, like super anti-LGBT. If you could. Oh, I'm sorry, LGBT trans ban on the military.
Really?
Jeez, you guys not read the news.
Okay. So save it for the Q&A. There'll be a microphone, and you can all have at it in a moment.
Sorry, but
Are you?
Okay.
Say that.
Dimitri's with us.
What an amazing time to start Q&A. Mike, you're a rock star. I love you. Okay. There's a mic over yonder, if folks want. Also, the questions that are being submitted are awesome. They're very tech-based, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to leave them for Bill Ottman to answer.
Hey guys, earlier you were talking about social media being a monopoly, and it got me to thinking, with social media, our information is the product, and the corporations receiving that are the buyers, and there are plenty of companies that do that. So are we using an old term for a similar problem, and is that unhelpful in some way?
Is that addressed to anyone in particular, or are you just throwing it to the group?
Just throwing it up.
Well, no, Lauren, I think you're probably best off addressing this one. You mentioned monopolies earlier.
So, is the old term? Are you referring to social media, or who is the client versus the customer?
Well, as far as I'm aware, monopoly is a company that sort of has a market cornered on a certain product. And tons of people sell information to corporations, which is what social media's product is. So when we're calling that a monopoly, it's not really a monopoly. For other people doing it, it's something different, but we're using the term monopoly still.
Well, I think regardless of whether you're looking as the client, as the user, or the advertiser or the person buying the data, because I think there's an argument to be made both ways. In both cases, there actually is still a monopoly, because if you look at, for example, the companies that have the largest trove of information, the largest access to this information, it's still those same companies, right? It's still Alphabet through Google and YouTube, and it's still very much Facebook, as we've seen. I mean, and I actually like that approach because it gives us more reasons to clamp down on them because they have several monopolies.
It's also a terrible game. Ruins families.
Okay. I've noticed. Okay, sorry. I've noticed as a culture, the majority of people are pro-freedom, pro-free speech. However, I've noticed throughout history, the people who are pro-free speech, once they gain power, they tend to ensure that, like, the faction that was not pro-free speech, that was once the hegemony, tends to suppress the people who were in power previously. How do we as a society and a culture prevent ourselves from, I don't know, becoming authoritative?
Yikes.
Just like that.
Right?
You, sir, have been censored.
How do we prevent ourselves from becoming the authoritarians that we oppose?
Anyone want to pick up on that? The idea of absolute power corrupting?
I think that we do that by having a complete understanding of what it means to live in a democracy. We need to be educated and understand that democracies fail, that I believe that that's why I believe in public education and how you need to teach children that this is something that needs to be cultivated and protected. So it has to be in the public zeitgeist, in the consciousness.
I have a bit of a different opinion as to how do we prevent ourselves from becoming authoritarians. I actually say that we don't rely too much on democracy, because your whole question was how do we prevent the people who now come in power, who were previously pro-free speech, from then suppressing the minority. I don't think, Michael Malice, who I had on my show, he said it great. My rights aren't up for discussion, much less a vote. So I very much believe in the idea of a constitutional republic where some things are not up for discussion.
So when it comes to a digital or internet bill of rights, what would be the punishment for breaking these rules, since many of the businesses see these fines currently as just a business expense and they essentially make more money off of breaking the rules anyway? How do we go about punishing them for doing so without becoming the full socialists or authoritarians essentially controlling these companies?
Daisy, do you want to grab that?
Look, that's a really, really good point, actually, that you raise, because it is all very well, as you know, we're talking about a digital bill of rights and, you know, making sure third parties have consent before they share your information, but you're absolutely right. How do you actually enforce those rules and those rights, particularly on a global scale, and particularly since these companies are so big and so rich that they can just fob up any kind of fine as a business expense? I mean, as to how we enforce that, look, I'm actually not sure yet, and that's what's so kind of scary about the way the internet is growing, and it keeps on evolving. We're going to have to keep on inventing more and more and more sets of rules as we go. I mean, as Lauren was saying, breaking them up is an option, you know, making them just a little bit smaller, so the fines, for instance, will have more of a consequence to them. Thinking of, I mean, you can talk about blocking them from I guess, trading with people, but then that would be bad because that would affect people's incomes and there could be loss of jobs. So it's extremely complicated, and thank you for raising that point, because it is very important to consider how we actually tackle this problem. Like, we've created a real sticky situation for ourselves here with the internet, and we need to somehow talk about this, ask these questions, and somehow solve it. I wish I had a better answer, but it's complicated.
Gulag, yeah, sure.
Speaking of the internet, we have an amazing question from Minds, from Psychedelic Gazelle, whoever you are. People are good is good in theory regarding immigration. But how should people like LGBT folks, ex-Muslims, etc., feel when a significant number of people immigrating from Muslim countries want us dead?
How could you say that a significant amount of people immigrating from Muslim countries want us dead? Do we have a statistic?
Well, just to play
on that?
devil's advocate for the UK, where popular polling data suggests that 0% of Muslims polled think that being gay is acceptable, and 52% would say that it should be illegal.
So
For anyone who's LGBT, that's a very concerning
That's
statistic.
fine. I mean, I'm not into religion, period. I mean, I practice Buddhism because I don't like Catholicism. I was raised, my mother was a nun, for Christ's sake. So, I went to Catholic school, and I understand, yes, she was a nun, an ex-nun, yeah. And my father was a garbage man, so, what are you going to do? So, but anyway, right now, as we're talking about freedom and will they come here and bring their ideology, what if they don't want to conform? Well, when the Supreme Court of the United States says that marriage equality is now the law of the land, and then you have specific, like Kim Davis, for example, saying it's her religious right not to follow the law and issue marriage certificates to people. So we already have that going on with other religions, but just to target the Muslims at this period of time, I believe, is just stirring up.
Look, it's like I take your point certainly about really fundamentalist Christianity. They do not like homosexuality, but it's slightly different with Islam than it is with Christianity in the fact that Christianity, and I don't agree with this viewpoint, but sees homosexuality as immoral behavior. So it's behavior that you choose to engage in and that you can choose to change. And they believe that if you don't repent, then the punishment will be in the afterlife. The Quran, Islam is slightly different in they believe all of that, but they believe that they can exact punishment on earth as well as in heaven, which is why there are so many Muslim countries where homosexuality is not only illegal, but punishment by death. And if you look at, even in Australia, it's interesting the point you raised about how apparently in America, Muslims are more accepting of LGBT people than Christians. In Australia, a couple of years ago, we had a plebiscite, so a postal vote on whether same-sex marriage should be legalized. And it was a non-compulsory, but about 87% of the population voted, so it was quite a large sample, and it won by about 61%. So a reasonable majority, but not a huge majority. And it came out when we had the electorates who voted yes and no, the toughest no voting elections were all Labour voters, but they were really immigrant heavy and largely Muslim populated. So while the kind of popular zeitgeist in the Australian media, which is very, very kind of regressive left wing, demonizes white people and it demonizes Christians, it was the white Christians actually who voted in same-sex marriage in Australia. So yeah, it is. I take your point totally about Christians and homosexuality, but Islam does take it one step further.
Right, and I think we're being a little bit Eurocentric in our terminology here when we're talking about is it okay to be gay, as if is it okay to put your elbows on the dinner table? In other parts of the world, they're asking, should you be killed for being gay? Yeah. There is a huge difference there. So the poll you referenced in America, is it okay to be gay? Let's ask Christians versus Muslims. Obviously, the Christians are still going to say no. I would love to see the polling like they've done in the UK. Is that should it be illegal to be gay? And this is what we're talking about. This is what people are so concerned about because there's totally evangelical fundamentalists in the United States.
Exactly.
But
No. I'm sorry. I saw his hand go up. So I was responding.
There's a big difference here that I think maybe we're not grasping it in its entirety because we are blessed enough to have lived in places where it's not like. Of course, you're not going to be killed for being gay. It doesn't even register for some of us.
Mike,
but
last word.
For other people, it's a big.
I don't think that being killed for being gay should be the bar that we're putting things out.
I would absolutely love it to be.
Have we heard of the Pulse nightclub? Was that a Muslim or?
That was a Muslim. Yeah,
it was a Muslim.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Wonderful way to move on to the next
That was
question.
a Muslim?
Yes, it was.
What I'm just going to say is
all right, my mistake.
Guys.
If you're going to be like, okay, Muslims can't come here because they're against LGBTQ, sorry, you're full of shit, because the Trump administration...
Right, exactly.
But again,
It's like,
is
all
he
of a sudden
trying
they're
to
so
kill gay
pro-gay.
Look, we discriminate against gay people. Like, I mean, I'm just looking at the thing now which says the Trump administration allowed a bill to go through that allows for discrimination against gay people in the workplace. That's shit. That's bullshit.
Okay, next question. Next question. Next question, guys.
He's also launching an initiative around the world to actually decriminalize homosexuality
He
in
said that
countries
before.
where
This
it's
is, I mean, he can
So we found
He
our
also
next.
added amazing, Trump's steaks were amazing and juicy, but,
So we
it's,
found our next panel topic that we're going to have next year, guys. All right.
And Trump University would make you a
Next
successful
question better be about
business.
Trump steaks.
Next
Let's go.
That he put
Like,
LGBT
I mean, really, it's like he's a con man. I lived in
Hang
New
on, I
York
think
my whole life.
we've got a
We know
question.
him.
Question coming in. Let's hear this gentleman.
Thank you guys, first of all, for coming out here. On the left, we hear a lot of talk about exploitation. On the right, we hear a lot of talk about, well, we want only the best and brightest immigrants coming here. How is it not a form of exploitation to strip these countries of their best and brightest, leading to a cascade making things worse at home? And is it not the soft bigotry of low expectations that we scapegoat the United States instead of holding them to be moral actors, fixing their own problems at home?
Okay.
I think you're absolutely right. It is completely a brain drain to say everybody who's smart and talented just come to America or Canada, but that's why we need immigration limits, right? Even when we're saying let's take the best and brightest, there still needs to be limits that respond to the marketplaces and the demands of the individual economy. Canada for a long time has had an amazing point system similar to Australia, and it was great. For a long time, the average immigrant was better educated than a native Canadian, which is perfect. But in places like Vancouver and Toronto, we still see the problem of these enclaves forming and a lack of assimilation because there were just too many immigrants, even though they were great and qualified. So it's not just, you still need to have limits, even if we're saying that there's going to be merit-based immigration. And that way as well, it doesn't completely drain these other economies of their, their doctors, their economists, their lawyers and everything.
I don't see that that someone coming to a country and not being highly educated is necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, they can come to the country and then get educated. I mean, it's nothing stopping a person who doesn't have the facilities back in their own country for whatever reason to come to a country like America or New Zealand and get a proper education.
I mean, it's a bad thing if you're a native person who wants that spot, who doesn't have skills, who
But
has to compete in that market.
Okay, so we're not doing anything to fix the problem of there being no education for Americans as well.
Right.
So,
Well, let's do both, right? It's not
yeah,
even
let's
hard.
do
We can a lot
both.
of
Bring in
things.
some people, give them education, give all the people education. That's what
Why
I'm all
not?
about.
I mean,
Let's open a- I mean, it's not
Yep.
free. We'll take the money from friggin' George Bezos.
No, but I mean, if
George
the
Bezos is his
immigrants
brother.
who we have statistics on immigration people, the low-skilled immigrants come to the United States. They add more, they pay more taxes into our economy than they get out in services. So and then it doubles for the those with education. So it's not like they're not contributing to the economy.
I mean, the
and-
Heritage
and the
Foundation
country.
has had conflicting studies, and one of their reports said that every immigrant we accept without a high school education actually ends up costing, I think it's upwards of 100,000. I don't know the exact.
Well, I'd
quote.
like to see
And
those
also,
stats, 'cause,
when we're
that's-
talking about specifically, are they claiming welfare? That's one part of it, but you have to look at in all Western economies, the people who are most likely to be unemployed. The most vulnerable parts of our populations are the populations who are less skilled. Is it a good idea to bring in more people to compete for those jobs when even the people here don't
that's
have
fine.
access
Then
to those
we
jobs?
should prosecute the employers who
I
hire
agree
them
with that,
instead
too.
of taking people out of chicken
But
factories.
even if we bring them in legally, they're still competing for those jobs that, because of automation, are getting fewer and fewer. It's
How about
causing
we,
an imbalance in the market.
How about we value, different sorts of vocation more, so that those become more desirable jobs for other people. So
Right.
like, if we place a higher value on educators, on medical professionals, these people who do these jobs that greatly benefit society, that don't really get, money for it. I mean, in New Zealand, we've had for a very long time, strikes from nurses and educators for the longest time because we don't pay them enough. These people educate our next generation, or fix your broken leg, and we don't pay them enough. So where's the incentive to get into that sort of vocation.
The thing is though, you make a good point there. But what is value, and should this sort of abstract concept of value actually dictate what people are paid? I mean, we have a very interesting Labor politician called Tanya Plibersek in Australia, and she astounded us all a little while ago about making a speech in Parliament about early childhood educators and metal workers. And early childhood educators, it's something like 96% female. Like, it's a really heavily female-dominated industry. And of course, metal workers is largely male-dominated. And she said that the reason that metal workers got paid $40 an hour and early childcare educators got paid $20 an hour was because it was an example of gender-based discrimination, because early childcare work was predominantly female. What she neglected to mention, by the way, I have utmost respect for anyone who works in early childcare. Like, I've nannied, I can't imagine doing that continually. What she neglected to mention was how dangerous it is to be a metal worker, what long hours you have to work. You're handling hot metals, you're working on building bridges, you're working on oil rigs, you risk death, dismemberment, injury, all sorts of things. You've got incredibly expensive tools to pay for, upfront expenses. You've got to pay for vehicles, expensive vehicles to transport those tools, all of which is eventually a tax deduction, but upfront it's a lot of money. And the degree, even though they're both 3 or 4 year degrees in Australia, the metalwork degree actually costs more than the early childhood education degree. So yeah, we need to value nurses, and we need, but there are other things there to consider in these different professions. It's not to do with gender, it's to do with what's required.
Yeah, so why don't we, if we're talking about
Last word, Mike.
It's not going to happen.
Clear white privilege. You get the last word.
I am a ginger. There is no privilege in being a ginger.
You're an oppressed minority.
I am a freaking oppressed minority.
You are.
Jesus Christ, you go to high school as a ginger. For fuck's sake.
Male privilege, whatever it is.
Non-binary. First of all, being a childhood educator, again, you're educating the next generation of children. We should be placing a huge amount of value on that. You could talk about the dangerousness of a job and that being a factor that adds into it as well, and that's fine. But, what about the long hours that teachers stay up, planning their lessons and things like that? All the other sorts of things that aren't necessarily just like physical manliness that factor into the quote unquote risks of being a teacher. The fact that you don't get paid enough, that's a risk in and of itself. You can't afford to have food. You couldn't afford to have a child. Any of that sort of stuff. These are other things that are going to add into the reason why we should be paying these people more.
A very valid point. Children are a drain on a family. Mike, thank you so much, and thank you everyone.
The children are.
Next conference, we're going to have Mike singing. Everyone on stage has a platform. Everyone on stage is subscribable to. You should definitely check every single person out here. Speaking as an immigrant, I disagree with everyone. They all got it wrong. It's much harder than they say. You all now have 5 minutes to take care of your business, but before you do, let's give everyone a huge round of applause. And we're back here in 5, less, because we took too much time, in 3 minutes for the Not Safe for Work, or as I call it, the sex panel. So get back here.